Church of England. It was largely during the First World War that people began to protest a great act of churchly civil disobedience against any prohibition of praying for the departed. But there's more to it than that. In that post-traumatic period, people questioned whether it was possible to look honestly and constantly into the horror of the First World War, the pain, the wounds of bereavement, and still maintain faith in God. And it was for many, many people the Catholic faith which gave them the answer. It is possible to look at the mystery of suffering and not to turn away and not to be silenced and not to despair. Because at the very heart of that faith is the cross. And in so many churches, we see the cross being literally looked at by Our Lady and St. John. In this astonishing environment, you can perhaps just imagine in the Middle Ages where a great cross would have hung. Invisibly behind us, so to speak, the cross hangs on a rood screen with Our Lady and the beloved disciple looking into the mystery of what seems to be meaningless horror, blank and dreadful suffering, looking and holding their ground. The faith in its fullness tells us that we can look and we can stand our ground. We don't have to make up easy answers. We don't have to make up solutions that will keep the world happy. We need to know that it is possible just to stand, to look, and to be held in that looking and standing. The dramatic reading we heard from the Revelation of John a few minutes ago speaks of how the saints conquer by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. The saints bear witness. The saints are there to give testimony, not to give answers, not to give happy bromides or good advice. They're there to witness to the fact that we can look at the worst that the world can do and yet believe. Because when Our Lady and St. John look at the crucified Christ, they see not only the terrible torment of a human being, they see the unshakable love of God, fastened in place as Jesus' body is fastened to the cross by the nails. They look at the terror of human suffering and human violence, and within it, at the heart of it, standing with the suffering, is the unshakable love of God, the Holy Trinity, given embodiment once and for all in the Word made flesh and the Word crucified for our sake. In the aftermath of the war, people developed a deeper sense of communion with the departed, certainly. But so many also developed a deeper sense of how the faith allowed us to look, not just to chatter, not just to think, but to gaze. Catholic faith spread out the mystery before them, visibly, audibly, not giving theories, not giving solutions, but giving life, a life in which we can see and we can stand, a life in which we find the courage to name the suffering and need of the world for what it is, not to turn away in fear or embarrassment, but to stand faithfully and to serve lovingly. And when we think of Our Lady and St. John standing at the cross, we are reminded of the fact that, of course, we are not called to this vocation as individuals. Mary, we can say, is able to bear the terrible sight of her son's suffering because her son's beloved disciple stands alongside her. John is able to bear the terrible sight of the disappointment of his hopes and the hopes of the disciples, because the Lord's mother is there, the one who above all knows the mystery of his origins. We see and we stand together. We learn how to look in faith and hope at the world in flames, the world of blood and violence, as we lock arms together in our vision, as we support one another in this, as we remind one another of the mystery that lies beyond the tragedy and horror of our world. Living with Mary in the communion of saints is living here and now in a place where we are surrounded, as we read in Scripture, by a great cloud of witnesses. All those who throughout the centuries have looked faithfully, lovingly and honestly at the needs and the suffering of the world and have held their ground in love and trust. Today we meet in a place where the cloud of witnesses is very much in mind. A place whose origins as a site of worship go back so long. A place marked by the memory of learning and piety and service and martyrdom. As we remind ourselves of that great cloud of witnesses, we realize, perhaps with a bit of a shock, that we, you and I, are going to be part of the great cloud of witnesses that will bring faith alive in the next generation. Do we ever, I wonder, think of what it means to be ourselves the tradition that others will inherit? We have learned and grown because of our communion. A communion that future generations will have with us, will draw on whatever faith and love we are able to live out. But here and now, we can remember and we can give thanks for that great truth at the heart of all we do. It is possible to look truthfully at the world not to make light of suffering, not to turn away from it, not to be driven to despair by it. It is possible because we stand together in the communion of saints. We stand together, arms locked, with all those who have looked into the life-giving mystery of Christ throughout the centuries. And we resolve, for the next 100 years or so, to do whatever we can, by God's grace and by the strength of the Spirit, to keep looking, to keep on being truthful, to keep loving and serving, and above all, to stand firm on the foundation of Christ, who is our life, now and forever.